WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is facing extradition to the United States for conspiracy to hack into Defense Department computers back in 2010. The organization has been renowned for helping whistleblowers to safely publish documents that the authorities would rather have kept hushed up. But further questions are being asked about WikiLeaks since it published thousands of unredacted secret diplomatic cables online. Will Assange be extradited to the U.S.? What's the real reason behind Ecuador's decision? And how will the futures of Assange and WikiLeaks impact freedom of expression? To discuss these issues and more, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Anna Tangen, current affairs commentator, and Atul Aneja, associate editor of The Hindu. We will also talk to Annie Mahon, a former officer of the British intelligence agency MI5 via satellite in Brussels. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. First of all, Atul, why do you think the Ecuadorian authorities have decided to change their mind and to get rid of the stone in the shoe and let British police officers step in?
Well, it's quite simple because you have a change of government in Ecuador, and the current head of state is very close to the Americans. The American pressure is weighing in very heavily on the Ecuador, and well, they're throwing in the towel as far as Julian Assange is concerned. So I think it's basically the relationship with the U.S. which has played a very major role in this decision by Ecuador to have him arrested and sort of revoke its asylum which it had granted, and even the passport to Julian Assange.
Perhaps this is another most interesting question. Let me switch to another question. Directly, you are a journalist. You work for the media, and you are from a democracy. This guy also comes from a democracy. First Amendment of the United States protects freedom of expression. Do you think WikiLeaks amount to that mandate and mission of protecting freedom of expression?
I think it does, because the First Amendment applies, as far as I understand, is when there is a leakage of information of this kind which is in public interest. Now that is the key. Are the revelations in WikiLeaks, do they amount to public interest? In my own view, they do. Because if you look at the basic leakage of documents from WikiLeaks, one is the Iraq logs, which talks about the killing of civilians, for example, which is called collateral murder, which has been titled as that, which clearly shows an American helicopter killing civilians, including two members of the Reuters news agency staff. So that's something which would have been kept under wraps, and that was something which changed perception about the Iraq war. This was happened in 2007, if I recall. Then you have the Afghan logs, which also talks about the atrocities committed against Afghans and ordinary Afghan civilians. And then, of course, you have the Cablegate, which is talking about the Hillary Clinton's private email server, and the emails from that to the DNC were made public by WikiLeaks. So in all accounts, I think the revelations are in public interest, and therefore I would say that he merits the consideration against the First Amendment or a parallel legislation in any other democracy. We're talking of democracy system. Within that, freedom of expression and public interest is vital, within that framework.
Anna, in the history of U.S. media, Washington Post earned its reputation for both the exposure of a Watergate scandal and particularly release of the Pentagon Papers during the Vietnam War. Under the protection of the First Amendment, Washington Post was not prosecuted. But why this time around Julian Assange would have to be extradited eventually to the United States on charges of treason as well as leaking state secrets?
Well, let's be clear on the issues and separate the fact that there is a public interest in knowing that your government is committing atrocities against civilians. That is perfectly acceptable. Julian Assange is not a hero. He is somebody who enjoys the spotlight. His ego is more important than the issues. If he had gone through some of the documents that he went through and redacted, and that means take out information that would be dangerous to individuals who are simply doing their job, that would have been responsible. But the fact is, he is not responsible. He's not the person who's leaking them. There are individuals who came forward with information. He published them. And his goal was to make himself famous. And he did that. But that is not make him a hero because he did it. It goes to the type of motivation that he had.
Let me cross over to Annie Mahone. Hello, Annie. Do you think the behavior of Mr. Julian Assange driven more by ego or by his responsibility as a media person? We were discussing in the Beijing studio the issue of, for example, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that serves to protect freedom of expression. What's your take?
My take is that Julian Assange is definitely a publisher. He's not a whistleblower, he's not a leaker. He is a publisher pure and simple, and over the last decade has won dozens of highly prestigious journalist awards around the planet. So there's no doubt about that. In terms of the protection he might be given under the American Constitution, the First Amendment, I think it's very interesting because people have said for years that that is only available to American journalists carrying out investigations in America. And yet, only a few months ago, I don't know if you remember the case of Christopher Steele, who was the author of the alleged dirty dossier on Donald Trump, former MI6 officer Christopher Steele. And he was being sued by other Russians who felt they had been libeled in this dirty dossier in the American courts. And the argument in the American courts was down to the fact that Christopher Steele was a former British intelligence officer from MI6. He was a British person, a British citizen living in Britain, and therefore he could not be accorded his right to freedom of expression under the First Amendment. And in that trial, the judge made a ruling saying that actually Christopher Steele operated in the public interest by publishing this uncorroborated dirty dossier, and therefore, even though he was a Brit living in Britain, was allowed to have First Amendment rights. Now this, I think, is going to be crucial in whatever case comes up around the Julian Assange case, because here we have an Australian citizen living in Britain who is going to argue precisely the same line of defence, presumably in America, and he should, under precedent, be given the same due legal process, the same due legal protection under the First Amendment as a publisher who is not American, who has never worked in America, who is not based in America, but who is exposing the crimes of the American state. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting developments in any court cases that come out of his arrest.
Here is a question for three of you. Back in 1979, exactly 40 years ago, we had the Islamic Revolution, and to my poor knowledge, a Canadian correspondent, if not an American reporter, got a clue that one of the American diplomats was able to seek shelter in the Canadian embassy. He knew the fact that he didn't expose it to the media. He didn't expose this to the public and the audience, the readers. Instead, what he thought at the first moment was to protect this American diplomat. Therefore, let's go back to the question about Julian Assange. By releasing thousands of classified documents, particularly cables of the State Department, he had actually endangered the lives of those whose names should not have been exposed to the general public. So, Annie, what do you make of such liabilities and the risks?
Well, I think it's very clear to see that over the almost 15 years of publishing, that nothing that WikiLeaks as an organisation has published has been proven wrong. Now, I'd be hard put to find any other media organisation anywhere else on the planet that could claim that. And even though there have been grandiose statements from various American politicians over that time saying lives are at danger, once the media hoo-ha dies down, then we get to a point where actually they say more quietly, no lives have been put at risk. Now, the only potential issue around that is, I think, the Afghan war logs, where these were stored securely out on a very secure cloud, which you could only access with a password. And this is what Julian has set up to protect those documents, because they did contain names which, might potentially have been put at risk. But in fact, it wasn't he who issued the password. It was actually two Guardian journalists who wrote a book trying to introduce him and used this password as a chapter title. And it allowed people to have access to all these names. So, in terms of journalistic practice, I can't see that WikiLeaks has put any step wrong in terms of protecting sources. What I would say is that it is definitely a new model of publishing, and it threatens the old model of legacy media, as well as embarrassing key governments and key corporations around the planet, which is why it has been so lambasted and why people are so desperate to try and get Julian Assange any which way, under any law, whatever way they can. They'll probably make up a new law if he goes to America just to get him. But I think he is a realistic threat to a lot of very old models around secrecy, around transparency, and around the old media. It's very interesting to watch the development.
Yes, it might be interesting and entertaining, but the fact is there is a potential liability and real liability in releasing the names of people who are engaged in sensitive work. And I would have said, Julie, as somebody who had been working in MI5 to realize that. I'm not against having anything that is done by a government exposed, corporations, etc. I was a lawyer, a prosecutor. If it's wrongdoing, it needs to be seen in the light of air. It's cleansing. But I don't see Julian Assange as this hero. He's winking at the media as he's being carried out of the embassy. He's obviously enjoying this. He likes his moment in the sun. I really would prefer if people would separate the issue of Julian Assange, the hero, as opposed to the issue of journalistic issues and ethics that go along, and the responsibilities that go along with reporting.
One of the founding principles for any democracy, too, is try to limit the absolute power of the government. With the lesson of the Pentagon Papers during the Vietnam War, which tried in vain to cover up some of the bad behavior, civilian casualties, so on and so forth. What do you think of, say, efforts by media people, by people like Assange, to promote transparency and to promote the responsibilities of the citizens so that the absolute power of agencies such as, or departments such as the Pentagon and the White House should be limited, should be supervised, and always put under severe scrutiny by the general public to avoid the tragedies and the mistakes of the Vietnam War?
Absolutely. I think in any democracy, journalism has, or the Fifth Estate has its own role to play in the survival and the well-being of any democracy. And unless there are agencies which check absolute power, democracy it does not do justice to itself. So therefore, to have a strong media is vital to the wellsprings of any democracy. Now the question arises that things are evolving, and technology has come in as a big game changer in the entire political discourse and also in the media discourse. And we are into several gray zones for which the rules of the game have not been properly defined. Now in case of Julian Assange, we are talking about the electronic media, we are talking about the digital age, and where I think the only yardstick is the public interest. That if you need classified information which is of public interest, you will not get it on files or other things which were there in the 50s and 60s, but you'll have to go into computer systems. And that's where the debate should be and where the rules need to be defined. Now, I just want to get back to one more point. I think I don't agree with Einar regarding being judgmental on Julian Assange as a person. I think we need to take out the emotion from here and go in the facts. If there are facts which prove that Julian Assange is that kind of a narcissist, as one of the judges in the British court said, then there has to be substantial information on the basis of which we can make that conclusion. Otherwise, I think it's highly subjective. And we may like someone, we may dislike, we may like somebody's face, we may like somebody to wink or not to wink, but I do not think that is substance enough to come to a judgment on an individual.
What do you think of the issue of a narcissistic?
Well, it's not a crime. and you can't prosecute anybody for it. If that were the case, Donald Trump would have been in trouble a long time ago. So that is not the issue. I just simply asked that the responsible journalism be separated from this issue of somebody who's more interested in his own fame and ego than he is perhaps in the issues that he's involved in. And it takes a responsible attitude towards it. Now, in this particular case in the U.S. is accusing him of hacking into computers, which is different from whistleblowing, from being a publisher. If, in fact, it is improved, and these are allegations, not facts, that he was involved in going into these classified computers, that is, in fact, a crime. Now, you'll notice in the papers they said that one of his aides, who worked very closely with him, was arrested in South America, and he has been taken to the United States.
Let me go back to Annie. One of the issues that I find very interesting, Annie, is it seems that the media people around the world are allegedly seen to pursue Pulitzer Prize, to promote their reputation, credibility, and influence through wartime reporting or whatever reports on scandals. Now, it's either a matter of responsibility of the journalist who wants to practice good journalism, or what Anna here in the Beijing studio calls ego-driven behavior. Which side do you take, Annie?
I would take the fact that we need responsible investigative journalists who will attract sources because of their particular journalistic reputation, get the information and fight for them. But I think as well that we've seen the media reaction around the planet since Assange's arrest last week, where everyone is now saying if he can be attacked, if he can be arrested, it is a threat to free media around the planet. And they're absolutely right, because I think I take issue with the comment of one of your guests that he is now being prosecuted for hacking. It appears actually that they're trying to get him for conspiracy to try and infiltrate a particular computer system, which Chelsea Manning allegedly was also already a part of. And this is precisely what investigative journalists do. Now, I know, because I was involved in a whistleblowing case, that any good investigative journalist will get a certain amount of information, and then they will push and push and push for more information, because they think that that way they can impose transparency on secret organizations, secret government.
Let me go back to the issue of transparency. Annie,
it's naive not to say that.
It's a very interesting issue about transparency. Look, during the Obama administration, this first African-American president ordered his department agents to promote transparency of a government document, and this has been signed into law by this president. Therefore, a lot of photos about the abusive behavior of U.S. GIs in Guantanamo were exposed to the general public. He demanded the release, unconditional release of photos that portrayed and exposed the torture and abuse by American troops in Guantanamo of POWs. But in doing that, President Obama did meet strong opposition and setbacks from the Pentagon, because such transparency threatens to endanger Americans, I mean those in the armed service. What do you think of this move by President Obama? This guy in power, I mean President Obama was in power to order something, to sign it into law, and yet Julian Assange, who seemed to be doing much of the same job, would be extradited to the United States and face justice.
No, I think that's where the shift is coming in. If you recall, during Obama's time, Chelsea Manning was pardoned, but only last month she's back facing justice because the entire trial is being reopened. So I think Obama was the one, despite all his faults regarding drone attacks, etc., which I completely disagree with. But on this point, when it came to Julian Assange and pardoning of Chelsea Manning, I think he was way ahead and far more progressive than Donald Trump. And now you see Pompeo, the Secretary of State, literally threatening Julian Assange of being brought to justice on alleged connections with the Russian intelligence GRU. So without any kind of process being preceded by any kind of any process. So I think there's a clear shift from the Obama years to the Trump years. and we will see how this is being tackled.
And what about the absurd allegation which has been used by government in Sweden or the United States that he had raped a girl in that Scandinavian country? I mean, this
it's actually two girls,
like
and
there
were two girls, and that's the allegations and allegations alone. The issue was that he was asked back to Sweden. They wanted him to come back and face trial. He did not want to do that. He said that it was a fix. It seems that he has a pattern. I'm just saying, I was saying that everybody is out to get him, that he's a little paranoid on that. Now, in terms of his current behavior, he spent 7 years in the Ecuadorian
let me go back to his girlfriend in Sweden. He was accused, to my knowledge, of having sex without protection, and that had amounted to a crime or a charge that was brought against him. Does that make any sense?
The charges have been dropped.
Well, they were dropped, but the Swedish government says that they're instituted. Right. The allegation was that somehow the Swedes were in cahoots with the U.S. I doubt that was true. I mean, the U.S. has a quite different agenda than accusing him of rape. They want to use him, and I agree, as a symbol, and they want to knock him down, and they do want to make sure that people think twice about publishing it. But, as I said, there's a difference between the individual who's doing it and the process and integrity of being a journalist.
Annie, what do you think of the prospects of WikiLeaks, since Julian Assange has basically lost his ability to continue the leadership?
Well, Julian Assange has been cut off from the internet for over a year now anyway, and WikiLeaks still goes forward and does what it does. It has a new editor-in-chief, a well-known and respected investigative journalist, and it will continue to do what it has done and provide a secure drop for people who are concerned about what's going on in corporations, in government, in intelligence agencies. And I've been aware of WikiLeaks since 2009. And coming from a sort of intelligence and whistleblowing background from a decade before that, I remember thinking, even when I first met them, this is a great new model. Because when you work with the legacy media as a whistleblower, it's very easy for your proof, your documents, whatever, to be vanished back into the hands of the police and the security agencies. And it's also very easy for the message of what you're saying to be titrated through a different sort of system, a different perspective. So you lose the key points of the very important issues that you might be raising. So I think I and any other intelligence whistleblower, and there are many, many of us around the planet, mostly in the UK and the US, but they've all paid a very high price for trying to expose the crimes of others, have always welcomed the new model that is WikiLeaks. And now that particular technological genie is out of the bottle, now that this new model is available and seen by all, more and more whistleblowers will continue to use it. It's also interesting to see as well that organisations such as the Guardian newspaper, the New York Times, have developed what they call secure drop boxes for potential whistleblowers to just submit in the same way that they would to WikiLeaks. So, you know, the very process, the very methodology of WikiLeaks is becoming mainstream. And for WikiLeaks itself to then be penalised because that's what they started, even though it's being imitated by the mainstream media, I think is rank hypocrisy.
What do you think of, say, Anna, what do you think of Annie's allegation and her argument?
Well, I have no problem with most of it. I mean, the fact is that WikiLeaks has been taken over by an individual who does not put himself above the mission of what he's trying to do. We would not have any information about the Panama Papers. We would not know about a number of things, including the scandals in German banks, insurance companies, things that they were selling abroad in American banks, intelligence community. We need access to that because it's the only way to prevent bad behavior. If governments and corporations believe that they are immune from the law, veiled by secrecy, we will all lose, regardless of whether we're in a democracy or any other system. But to the extent that we're talking about responsible journalism, please do not mistake that Julian Assange represents that face of responsible journalism. He doesn't. And you're doing a disservice to the people like yourself, Julie, who have seriously gone forward, risked everything in order to bring forth light onto subjects that need it.
Two, what do you make of the alleged unpredictability of U.S. President Donald Trump, who says WikiLeaks is not my thing, despite frequently applauding the organization during the 2016 presidential campaign? After WikiLeaks disseminated the hacked DNC emails in 2016, then candidate Trump infamously declared, WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks. In fact, Trump mentioned WikiLeaks more than 100 times in just the final month of the 2016 campaign, according to factba.se. Why Trump's non-answer on Julian Assange arrest now? Atu.
Well, a number of factors. In fact, the spokesperson for Donald Trump, I think White House spokesperson, has said that was a joke, which I think the comment itself is a joke. So, you know, you yourself have mentioned that Donald Trump raising Julian Assange more than 100 times during his election campaign. I think
was that a joke, or was his response to the
response? The White House spokesperson.
I've seen the tape. I don't see anything funny about it, and I don't notice that he is being humorous at all. He's asked directly, "What do you think about this?" I don't know. I don't know. He's not my thing.
No, not him. The spokesperson is saying that what Trump said during the 2016 campaign was a joke, and that I think
100 times.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So, but I want to make another point, which is that the Donald Trump presidency has a number of power centers within it, and he's trying to play a balancing act of balancing all of them. And I think, I don't know where the vice president goes, where Pompeo goes, so there will be pressures which are very strongly anti-Assange, which are part of Donald Trump's team. So it's very unpredictable where it goes, but if they take a hard line on Julian Assange, I will not be surprised.
Well, wait a second, let me add something. We're just coming off the Mueller report, where part of the allegations were that people within his administration, and currently one who is under indictment and is about to go to trial, was in direct communication in order to get these leaked files from Hillary Clinton. That was part of this whole case of whether or not there was collusion or something going on between Donald Trump and the Russians. So, yes, I think it's to his advantage to kind of minimize this issue at this point, because now it could be possibly re-raised. No matter how great Pompeo thinks this is and how he's going to take off Assange's head and put it on a platter in the U.S., the fact is there could be incidental damage if he, in fact, does decide to make a deal and cast aspersions or allegations against Donald Trump, that he was, in fact, in contact with people from his administration. Now, whether it's true or not, this could bring a headache to Donald Trump.
But if you see the Mueller report itself, that has sort of exonerated.
We have never seen the Mueller report.
I mean, the summary of which has been made public.
4 pages of the 380?
We'll see. Let the full report come out. But the statements which have come out is that Mueller report does not link up Trump with Russiagate. So this allegation that the GRU of Russia was the conduit between Assange and Trump, I think that's not, there's no proof of that.
Oh, yes, but there's a difference between, as a prosecutor, I can tell you there are things that you can charge, and there are things that you can't prove that you suspect. And we don't know the answer to that as yet.
We'll see.
Hillary Clinton said at a New York event, I think it's clear from the indictment that came out, it's not about punishment or punishing journalism. However, some experts accounted that parts of the indictment go head-to-head with basic journalistic activities protected by the First Amendment. What do you think of Hillary?
Well, I think Hillary has, let us say, some skin in this game. She was the alleged damage party. She still holds on to this idea that there was a conspiracy against her and that it lost her the election, that if these pedestrian emails and other damaging sources had not come out, that she would have in fact won the election. That may or may not be true, but that is how she feels. So bringing Assange to justice is going to bring her to the same side of to the Secretary of State.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that's the end of this discussion about Julian Assange, who is likely to be extradited to the United States on charges of leaking classified documents through WikiLeaks. I'm Yang Ray. See you next time. Goodbye.